Hello everyone, today I have the FX2, which is sort of like the younger sibling to Sony's FX3. Today I'm going to be going around 3 different businesses, testing out this new camera in many different shooting environments and telling you all about it as we go. Probably the key spec when it comes to the FX2 is this 33 megapixel sensor, which actually enables it to be able to shoot 4K, which is oversampled from 7K, so it's going to look like some really nice crisp 4K. And of course you've got Sony's stunning AF system and that lovely color science that you're used to seeing from Sony bodies. So one thing what I think is really interesting and quite different actually from some of the other equivalent Sony cameras is of course that 33 megapixel sensor. That sensor allows you to gather more than the traditional 12 megapixels like on the FX3 and A7S and even FX6. That means that the 4K that comes out of this camera is actually oversampled from 7K, of course, having way more detail. That will help a lot when you're in a low light environment, because if you're experiencing a lot of noise in your footage, of course, once you take that 7K image and downscale it to 4K, it's going to be a lot less noticeable. The other thing that this camera does when it comes to the main video recording modes is it also can shoot in 4K up to 60p, but that 4K up to 60p is not actually oversampled from the 7K, and the reason for that is because it has a super 35mm crop. That's about a 1.5 times crop. It's just something to take into account. I actually quite like it because it means that this prime lens almost becomes 2 lenses, right? Like if I'm shooting in 25 or 30, I can then activate that super 35mm crop via the slow-mo if I want to then get a bit more reach. For me, it offers a nice flexibility. Some people like consistency through their lenses. It really just depends what kind of shooter you are. The lovely thing about this camera as well is that because I don't know what's going to happen from any given moment one to the next, is I can rely heavily, very heavily on the autofocus if I want. So, you know, I'm not that familiar with how espresso martinis are made, so I don't know exactly what the next step is going to be. So rather than having to try and manual focus it all and just guess what's going to happen and potentially miss moments, I can rely on that AF system, which has 759 points. It actually also has some AI capabilities, so the AI is sort of analyzing what's going on in the frame and what I think I might want in focus. It's got all the traditional focus modes, like people, animals, birds, stuff like that. So it's really good for leaning on it in any given moment, or of course, if I was solo shooting myself, I could just stand in front of the camera and I know it's going to nail focus every time. You can see as well here, I'm just sort of doing a swaying camera motion, all filming entirely handheld. And that is utilizing the 5.5 stops of IBIS and even the active IBIS mode. So it's just going to make sure that you get really amazing stable footage. I love shooting handheld because you don't need to faff around with tripods, equipment. If you know that you can get a really good image just by holding it in your hands, I will always prefer to do that on a camera. It means I can just be so much closer to the action. It means that also if I wanted to use this little eyepiece, I can use the eyepiece. One of the other key video specs is the fact that it can shoot full HD up to 120p. So rather than the 4K that some of the other Sony Cine line cameras can produce, this one's only 1080. For me, that doesn't really matter because I own a Sony camera that shoots 4K 100. And to be honest, I almost never use 4K 100. It's quite specialist. It's only when you want that ultra slow-mo. All the video in this camera can be shot in 10-bit 42, so there's loads of color flexibility there, perfect for anybody that wants to grade, alongside the fact that you can also shoot in S-Log3, which is sort of the most popular Sony log format if you want to post-process your footage. But if you don't, it also has a Cinetone. There's even more recording options you can access using this camera as well if you have an external recorder. So here I have my Atmos Ninja, which would even allow me to record in Apple ProRes RAW, which will have even more color data. Just thought I'd mention it because I think it's really cool that you can get such professional codecs using this system. one really key difference between this camera and some of the other Sony Cineline series is their ability to shoot in low light. Now, because this has a 33 megapixel sensor, it's naturally, generally speaking, the higher megapixel you go, the less it's going to perform well in low light. So that is kind of reflected in this camera. So the typical other Sony cameras have a base ISO of 800 and then a second base ISO at 12,800, which is obviously a very high ISO number, meaning you can ride that ISO wheel if you're in a low lit environment. This one, the base ISO is also 800, but the upper limit is only 4,000. So that's quite a lot less than 12,800. That's, as I said, just because these types of sensors, the larger megapixel, they tend to struggle with noise a bit more. So what does that actually practically mean? Well, it means that you can't ride your ISO as high, so you probably want to cap out at about 4,000 or probably maybe one stop of light over 4,000, but I wouldn't go that much higher or you're probably going to introduce a lot of noise into your images. So 4,000 is still a pretty good dual base ISO for the higher limit. You know, a lot of other camera manufacturers, the higher limit is also 4,000. So I don't think it's a big problem. I think it's just not quite as unbelievably good as some of the other Sony cameras. So one really awesome thing about this camera, which I think is incredibly smart, is it's quite clear Sony have really wanted this camera to be for content creators, and they thought about that with the design. And the main thing that I want to tell you about is because when you flip the camera from horizontal to vertical, the menu screen changes with it. It's a very small thing, but I love just the fact that I can go like this at free will and it will just move with it. I love monitoring my image using histograms. Is a really big part of my workflow. So having that histogram just do that 90-degree flip is perfect. It really helps me for when I'm filming bespoke vertical content, which is what I'm going to be doing here at Oak Coffee. So one of my favorite features of this camera also is they've added a brand new quick menu. And the quick menu has actually been borrowed from the Sony Burano and Sony Venice systems. So these are pretty much the most premium Sony cameras that are available on the market. This menu system has been taken pretty much directly from them, which is amazing news. And what it does is it's basically a quick menu where you can control a lot of very key settings like shutter speed, ISO, white balance, yada yada. But because it has a bespoke button, I can then just use my touch of my fingers and this bespoke button to change any of those settings on the fly extremely quickly. So when it comes to the design of the body, you'll notice that I have the FX3 here, and it is extremely similar. This is perfect because one of the reasons the FX3 was so popular is because, in my opinion, they absolutely nailed the design of the body. So it's got this nice flat top, makes it quite compact. It's still got a nice big grip. There's also a lovely movie to stills switch that you can really easily press, which brings me on to the stills capability of this camera. Obviously it's 33 megapixel and it can shoot up to 10 frames a second when shooting in both JPEG and HEIF. Now, do I think this camera is really going to be used by photographers? In my opinion, probably not. You're better off with one of Sony's more photography-based bodies. But the fact that this has much better stills capabilities than many of its cinema counterparts is definitely a factor in buying this camera, it being quite a bit cheaper than some of those bodies and actually having better stills performance. So, who do I think this camera is truly for? Well, I think it's a really good entry into the Sony video system. It actually does, in my opinion, about 80 to 90% of the things that their more expensive cameras do. So there really isn't much difference. The only ways that this really loses out is that there's no 4K 100, there is a crop on the 4K 60, and you can't ride that ISO quite as high when filming in low light. But for those three specs, you're actually saving an awful lot of money. So I think that's a really good one to consider. It's basically a slightly more affordable FX3. So if you're slightly green to the industry and you just really want to get your hands on some professional filmmaking gear without spending quite so much money, this is a brilliant way to do so. But that's it from me. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Please do ask any questions about this camera down below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Have a great day.